Okay, hello everybody. My name is Luke Denoyer, and this is my final presentation for the epic. Cormac McCarthy's fifth book, Blood Meridian, or The Evening of Redness in the West, is an epic novel and anti-Western written in 1985 that follows the exploits of a ravenous group of scalp hunters called the Glanton Gang. Although this text does not fit neatly into the category of the modern epic, in the same way that The Lord of the Rings, Star Wars, or Dune might, critics have done much to explore this book and discuss in what ways it follows certain formulas of the traditional epic, and in what ways it subverts them. Some critics, such as Justin Evans, have argued that Blood Meridian is a critical epic, as it is a subversion of the traditional epic's intent to create norms and instead criticize the society that it exists within. Before we discuss specific examples of epic qualities in the novel, let me first give you a brief summary of the story and context for why it was written. The story starts with introducing the reader to the main anti-hero of the story, named as the child in the beginning of the book, the kid for the majority of the novel, and then finally the man at the end of the story. In the first 2 pages, the kid runs away from his home in Tennessee at the age of 14 to live a life traversing the American West, doing odd jobs and trying to survive the conditions of the 1840s on his own terms. Immediately, the kid leaves his home and takes up fighting as often as he can and is shot in the back within the first 25 pages. This has little impact on the story, and he fully recovers. He soon joins a filibustering mission with a group of American military men who want to revive the Mexican-American War. On his journey west, the illegal army is met with a group of Comanche warriors who kill everyone except for the kid and his friend Sproul, who within days dies from an infection from a vampire bat bite. After being arrested by Mexican authorities, he's released by Toadvine, a character who he had a brawl with earlier in the book, but who he became friends with after lighting a saloon room on fire. Toadvine tells the Mexican authorities that he is an expert scalp hunter, and then we are introduced to the Glanton Gang as a whole, which has notable members such as John Joel Glanton and McCarthy's most infamous villain, Judge Holden. The Glanton Gang spends a majority of the book killing Native Americans and selling their scalps to the Mexican government. This becomes more ravenous as the gang kills peaceful villages of Mexican citizens for profit, as they find they can get away with this. The climax of the book occurs when the Glanton Gang starts to set up a robbery operation on the Gila Ferry that goes bad due to an overwhelming attack from Yuma warriors. Afterwards, most of the gang is dead except for the judge, the kid, Toadvine, and a character named Tobin. The judge hunts the kid in the desert for days because he believes that the kid is responsible for the end of the gang. And the kid is able to get away, and then the book jumps into the future where the kid is now called the man. And we are left at the end of the book with an image of the man dead and the judge playing the fiddle. And I'm going to read this introductory first page of the novel because I think it gives us a good sense of the language and what McCarthy asked of us when we first enter into the book. So, see the child. He is pale and thin. He wears a thin and ragged linen shirt. He stokes a scullery fire. Outside lie dark-turned fields with rags of snow and darker woods beyond that harbor yet a few last wolves. His folk are known for hewers of wood and drawers of water, but in truth his father has been a schoolmaster. He lies in drink. He quotes from poets whose names are now lost. The boy crouches by the fire and watches him. Night of your birth, 33, the Leonids they were called. God, how the stars did fall. I looked for blackness, holes in the heavens, the dipper stove. The mother dead these 14 years did incubate in her own bosom the creature that would carry her off. The father never speaks her name. The child does not know it. He has a sister in this world that he will not see again. He watches, pale and unwashed. He can neither read nor write, and in him broods already a taste for mindless violence. All history present in that visage, the child, the father of the man. So one of the biggest pieces of inspiration for Blood Meridian comes from a book called My Confessions, which was written by the American painter Samuel E. Chamberlain. Chamberlain was an actual member of the real historical Glanton Gang, and he detailed his life while being a part of the group. In the book, many of the characters in the Glanton Gang In the book Blood Meridian, the characters are based off of real characters in the Clanton gang, so they share names and characteristics that Chamberlain wrote down in My Confessions. And this includes Judge Holden and John Joel Glanton. So here's a quote from the book that describes the real historical Judge Holden. The second in command, now left in charge of the camp, was a man of gigantic size who rejoiced in the name of Holden, called Judge Holden of Texas. Who or what he was, no one knew, but a cooler, more blooded villain never went unhung. He stood 6'6" in moccasins, had a large, fleshy frame, a dull, tallow-colored face destitute of hair and all expression, always cool and collected. But when a quarrel took place and bloodshed, his hog-like eyes would gleam with a sullen ferocity worthy of the countenance of a fiend. Terrible stories were circulated in camp of horrid crimes committed by him when bearing another name in the Cherokee Nation in Texas. He was by far the most educated man in northern Mexico. So it's interesting to keep in mind how McCarthy is merging the dream time of the Midwest with an actual historical document and using the real characters and their characteristics of Samuel Chamberlain's book in order to like elevate the book to a higher reality that makes it more poignant foundation myth of America. Okay, so keeping with the historical context in mind, scholars such as Dan Moose have noted that part of the impetus for this book was the Vietnam War, and he explains that this book fits into the grittier American landscape of novels that occurred directly after the war. McCarthy implements the realities of manifest destiny often in this novel and wants to assure us that this principle is elementary to the nation it exists in. Part of this idea, part of the idea behind this is noticing how US imperialism continued in the 20th century. We are often given lines from Judge Holden, who is the personification of American manifest destiny, such as war is God, moral law is an invention of mankind for the disenfranchisement of the powerful in favor of the weak. Historical law subverts it at every turn, and whatever in creation exists without my knowledge exists without my consent. McCarthy ensures us the judge's historical permanence by crafting him into a supernatural character through the final lines of the book. Quote, he never sleeps. He says he will never die. He dances in light and in shadow, and he is a great favorite. He never sleeps, the judge. He says he will never die. So now I'm going to move on to some of the actual epic qualities that scholars have noticed about the book. And then for the final slide, I want to return to Justin Evans' argument that Blood Meridian is a critical epic. So I wanted to start off with writing style because I think it is one of the most gripping aspects of the book. I read the first page already. I'm excited to read this upcoming passage. Some have criticized his writing style as being overly muscular or masculine, but I fall on the other side. I think I take a great deal of interest in his archaic aesthetics, how portentous it is, how biblical it is. We can see within the first page of the book that McCarthy rarely uses any punctuation besides the period and never uses quotation marks. In terms of epic style, scholars have noted that McCarthy makes use of simile and parataxis, and parataxis is the linking together of words or phrases or even sentences by simple conjunctions like the word and, rather than the use of subordinate clauses. He uses this form excessively when writing scenes of extreme violence. And this is said to mimic the style of Greek epics, specifically the Iliad. And the tone of this writing also takes on the same aesthetic form of the Greek epic in that there is a very solemn but not melancholic feeling to it. Again, it's portentous writing. It has a biblical feel. So now I'm going to read this passage. It's one of my favorites in the book. I like reading aloud because it almost feels like it should be. So a legion of horribles, hundreds in number, half naked or clad in costumes attic or biblical or wardrobed out of a fever dream, with the skins of animals and silk finery and pieces of uniform still tracked with the blood of prior owners, coats of slain dragoons, frogged and braided cavalry jackets, one in a stovepipe hat and one with an umbrella and one in white stockings and a blood-stained wedding veil, and some in headgear or crane feathers or rawhide helmets that bore the horns of bull or buffalo, and one in a pigeon-tailed coat worn backwards or otherwise naked, and one in the armor of a Spanish conquistador, the breastplate and pauldrons deeply dented with old blows of mace or saber done in another country by men whose very bones were dust, and many with their braids spliced up with the hair of other beasts until they trailed upon the ground, and their horses' ears and tails worked with bits of brightly colored cloth, and one whose horse's whole head was painted crimson red, and all the horsemen's faces gaudy and grotesque, with daubings like a company of mounted clowns, death hilarious, all howling in a barbarous tongue, and riding down upon them like a horde from a hell more horrible yet than the brimstone land of Christian reckoning, screeching and yammering and clothed in smoke, like those vaporous beings in regions beyond right knowing, where the eye wonders and the lip jerks and drools. So we can see the repetition of and, the parataxis, the simile, very grand language. And this scene takes place, I mentioned earlier in the summary, this is when the kid joins up with an illegal military trying to revive the Mexican-American War. This takes place, he's traveling with this group through the desert, and he sees Comanche warriors coming down, riding down, and we get this hellish description of just this approach of natives, and it's I think the elevated language sense is a very obvious similarity we have between the older epics. Okay, so one of McCarthy's most famous quotes is that books are made out of books. He rarely does interviews, but I think he's done, like, he did one with Oprah, and I think he said it there. But he thoroughly believes that all books are made out of other books. And we see examples of this littered throughout Blood Meridian, as we find that Judge Holden directly parallels Milton's Satan, while also being an embodiment of Melville's Moby Dick. We also get references to Greek epics, as there are in structure, as in there are 23 chapters and an epilogue in Blood Meridian, and then there are 24 chapters in Homer's Odyssey. Many have noted that McCarthy's use of summative chapter titles are a reference to written summaries in Paradise Lost that happened before Hit's chapters. There are also a myriad of references to the Bible. This is interesting because we know that one of the qualities of the epic is that it is a summative analysis of the stories of that culture combined into a single text. When the epic moves from oral to literary, it continues to be a summative guide to the smaller narratives of that culture. This becomes more complicated as we move into modernity. McCarthy is put into a position where he is dictating the canon as to analyze their themes. The book serves to navigate these selected narratives, and in this way, it works in the same way that the older literary epics do, except that, again, the canon is larger at this point and more contested. So Blood Meridian has a component of self-awareness to it in the aspect that it gets to pick the canon, and this differs from older epics that wanted to be summative texts of like a complete canon that there wasn't much debate around. And this gives McCarthy, again, another opportunity for criticism. It is noticeable in the genre of the epic that characters do not have much depth. They move in their journey without much psychological complexity or self-reflection. Self-reflection would defeat the purpose of the epic hero, who is meant to give an identity to people who consume the epic. self-awareness or psychological depth of the epic character would then reflect on an insecurity in the society, as their foundational ideas are shown to have always been in a state of ambiguity. Blood Meridian mimics this choice for characters. They are unable to escape the metaphysics of violence that surround them. And so each character fully embodies the eternal reality of violence that the book is trying to express. Although their lack of depth reflects that of older epic heroes, their acts of violence and their deaths do not signify towards a greater moral ideal. It is all shown to be a useless struggle. This is summarized best by Judge Holden's line on will, which reads as, quote, "War is the truest form of divination. It is the testing of one's will and the will of another within that larger will, which because it binds them is therefore forced to select." Another quote from Judge Holden. "It makes no difference what men think of war," said the judge. "War endures. As well, ask men what they think of stone. War was always there. Before man was, war waited for him. The ultimate trade awaiting the ultimate practitioner. That is the way it was and will be. That way and not some other way," end quote. And so once again, McCarthy will appropriate a device of the epic and turn it towards criticism. And the two pictures I chose, so the bottom left is actually just like one of those AI generated images. I went on a subreddit for Cormac McCarthy, and it was very popular because I think people said it like properly reflected kind of the feverishness of the Blood Meridian landscape, the hallucinatory, chimera-filled reality that the judge spins, and then looking at a picture from the Odyssey where the violence of Odysseus towards the suitors is shown in a very triumphant and clear manner. There's a clear like morality of justifiable violence there. So there's an interesting distinction in these two artworks, and I thought it'd be interesting to include them. Okay, so we notice in the book that it is Judge Holden who spins the metaphysics of this world. We have hints of Judge Holden's supernatural presence as a supernatural presence, and I have mentioned earlier the ending quote that many have taken to be proof of his status as the devil. But if we continue to entertain the idea that the judge is a supernatural character, then we can again make comparisons between Blood Meridian and the traditional epic. Although there is no consensus on what Judge Holden actually is, there is the opinion that he is either like Milton's Satan or an Archon of the Demiurge, which is a popular interpretation of the book, that it is a Gnostic tragedy. For those unfamiliar with Gnostic belief system, the Demiurge is considered to be neither malignant or mentally deficient god which trapped the world of spirit into the world of matter at the beginning of time. Archons are the hands of the Demiurge and are therefore considered in the Gnostic worldview to be evil. We also must have the understanding that Gnostics view the material world as completely evil, as it was created by the Demiurge to trap the spirit. And that our freedom from this world comes from cultivating and understanding that humans have a spark of divinity in them, which, when cultivated, can allow them to escape the material world. Archons are often thought of as the jailers of the human soul, and the only way to like surpass these archons is again through the cultivation of realizing there's a divine spark within you, also known as like the cultivation of gnosis. If you look again at Judge Holden as an archon, then we can see that the metaphysics that he has created is in part an attempt to entrap humans on this earth in a mindless and inescapable cycle of violence. One of the most interesting parallels to the traditional epic is where gods themselves are often opposed to the wills of their creation. Think Poseidon in the Odyssey. McCarthy's possible appropriation of Gnostic themes would take this idea to a logical conclusion, that the gods created humans only to suffer in this novel, which again does not quite it's an exaggeration of an epic theme, I think. And not exactly just a reflection of an epic. It's again, he takes these themes of the epic and then he finds ways to subvert them. He's always trying to use these themes in new ways. And now that we know that, we can talk about the critical epic. So up to this point, we have discussed how Blood Meridian uses many of the same elements of traditional epics, but I have still shown like an ambivalence about its status as part of the epic genre. I wanted to return to Justin Evans' idea of the critical epic by first introducing a few arguments about the epic genre that he considers in his paper to disenchant and to disintoxicate Blood Meridian as critical epic. It's a wonderful paper. I recommend it. The setup for his argument starts with opposing the ideas of Lukács and Bakhtin, who believed that the epic was a dead genre that was replaced by the realist novel. And this is opposed to the ideas of Herbert F. Tucker, who believed that the traditional epics were still being made through World War I. Evans wants to argue that epics are still made today and that they follow the same path. They follow the same path as traditional theory turning into critical theory. That's essential to the argument. Evans wants to argue that in the same way that the Frankfurt School used traditional theory, but used it in order to criticize modern societies, the creation of the critical epic was able to exist as it could also use traditional themes of an epic in order to criticize modern society. Note that Evans does not argue that McCarthy has ever read like Adorno or other Frankfurt School theorists. Evans wants to argue that Blood Meridian is both a novel and a critical epic. In fact, for something to be a critical epic, it has to be a novel because the novel has to exist as something that subverts norms in society. To quote Evans, the novel is related to our idea of the epic in much the same way that critical theories are related to traditional theories. The book's ulterior purpose, to echo Auden, is to tell the truth about, and thus disenchant, the idea of the epic and of the society of which that idea is a part. End quote. And so we see from the previous examples in the slides, a philosophy of the world that vindicates violence and furthermore creates this landscape through elevated language and a myriad of literary references. But we're not left with the feeling as though we're not left with the feeling that this is our reality. It is its own unreality with the heightened qualities of our own world. Those qualities of the book exist to point at the failures of the modern US to subvert its own will as an imperial empire. History to McCarthy has repeated itself with Vietnam, and this is due to the formation of Manifest Destiny as a calcified Dreamtime value. For this reason, I think it would be incorrect to write off Blood Meridian as a nihilistic facsimile of our world. It should instead be understood as a criticism of the values that underpin our current society. Thank you for watching my talk, and I'd like to thank Dr. Davis for allowing me to cover Blood Meridian, as it's one of my favorite books. I find it really interesting, and I had a lot of fun doing this project, so thank you for watching. That's all I have.